The receipt had been folded and unfolded so many times that the paper had gone soft along the creases. Soft the way old cloth goes soft, not from washing, but from being handled by hands that did not know what else to hold on to. Mara Fenn kept it in the left pocket of her coat against her ribs, where she could feel it without looking at it. She had memorized every line by the third day. The way you memorize something not because you are trying to, but because you have returned to it so many times that the words have moved from the page into the body, into the place where things are kept, not as information, but as weight. $1,180. 300 paid in cash, the first day money she had been putting aside since March, in a coffee can on the shelf above the kitchen sink, the same kind of coffee can her father had used for his tools, which was not a coincidence, but was also not something she had thought about until much later. 220 charged to the debit card she shared with nothing and no one. The rest marked pending in red ink, which was its own kind of threat. Red ink on white paper in a man's heavy handwriting, the kind of handwriting that assumed it would not be questioned. She was 26 years old and she had not slept more than 4 hours since Monday. The shop was called Colton Auto Salvage and Repair, and it sat at the edge of a two-lane road outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the land flattened in autumn into scrub grass gone yellow and the sky turned the color of old iron. The sign above the door had lost two letters sometime in the last decade, and no one had replaced them, which was the kind of detail that told you something about a place if you were paying attention, which Mara had not been when she first drove here 9 days ago. She had been paying attention since. She had been paying attention to the sign and to the chain link fence along the back of the property, and to the yard full of gutted cars stacked two and sometimes three high, their windshields gone milky, their door seams rusted to the color of dried blood. And she had been paying attention to Dex Colton and to the way he moved behind the parts counter with the ease of a man who had spent years making sure that every advantage in a room belonged to him. She stood at that counter now with both hands flat on the plywood surface. The plywood was scarred from years of tools dropped and slid and dragged across it, and it smelled of machine oil and the particular staleness of a room where the same air has been breathed by the same person for too long. Above her, a strip light buzzed and flickered at its far end, the kind of light that made everyone look a little unwell and made documents look more official than they were. Loose spark plugs crowded one end of the counter. A 9/16-inch wrench lay near the invoice pad. A cracked jar held valve caps priced at $3 each. These were the ordinary objects that filled the space between her and the man on the other side, and she had looked at each of them carefully this afternoon, because looking at them was easier than looking at him, and because looking carefully at ordinary things was something her father had taught her to do, and doing things her father had taught her was the only way she knew to feel him close. Dex Colton was in his mid-50s, broad through the chest, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had since become useful. He wore a canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he moved behind the counter with the ease of a man who knew every inch of a room and knew that knowing it was its own form of power. He had a way of speaking that sounded like patience, but was actually its opposite, the slow, deliberate speech of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up to it. He slid the purchase form toward her with two fingers and tapped the blank signature line. "Storage fees start at 5 o'clock," he said. "That gives you 23 minutes, Clara. The engine is beyond repair and has been since day 3. Sign the form, take the 600, and stop carrying something that cannot be carried anymore." Her name was not Clara. He had called her that twice now, and both times she had not corrected him, and she was beginning to understand that the mistake was not a mistake. It was a small erasure, the kind that costs nothing to make and tells the person being erased exactly how much space they are permitted to occupy in a room. "I am not selling it," Mara said. Her voice came out thinner than she intended. 3 overnight shifts in 48 hours had left gray half-moons under each eye, and a heaviness behind her sternum that was not quite grief and not quite exhaustion, but some compound of the two that had no clean name and had been sitting there since 14 months ago, when the grief was new and the exhaustion was just beginning. Her black work shoes were wet through at the seams from the morning shift at the laundromat off Route 18, where the floor drain backed up on Tuesdays, and you learned to expect it after the first week. The $43 folded in her right coat pocket was what remained after the debit card charge and gas, and the 2 nights this week when she had eaten crackers from the vending machine in the warehouse break room and told herself it was a choice. The receipt in her left pocket pressed against her ribs. Behind decks, the repair bay opened into the interior of the shop, and through the gap in the wall, she could see the motorcycle. It sat against the far wall under a hanging shop light, leaning on its kickstand, with the left side cover removed and a red shop rag spread beneath it. The parts arranged on the rag with a neatness that had bothered her since the first time she noticed it 2 days ago. It was the neatness of someone staging something rather than working on something, the neatness of a performance. The motorcycle was a 1974 Harley-Davidson shovelhead, and its paint was black that had gone flat and dull from road years. Without losing its honesty and its chrome, had the particular dimness of metal that has been polished faithfully for a long time by someone who knew it would never be new again and polished it anyway. The fuel tank had a dent on the left side, shallow and oval, the shape of something struck once and then lived with for 20 years. Mara's father had put that dent there when Mara was 6 years old, backing the motorcycle out of their narrow driveway in the dark before a 5:30 shift and misjudging the distance to the fence post by 4 inches. He had come back inside and woken her up to tell her about it, which was the kind of thing he did, and they had gone out together in their pajamas in the dark and looked at the dent in the glow of the porch light, and he had laughed until she laughed. And then he had gone to work and she had gone back to bed and the dent had stayed, and now she was 26 and the dent was still there and her father was not. Walter Fenn had driven that motorcycle to work for 28 years. He had been a maintenance technician at a regional water treatment facility 12 miles outside Tulsa, a job that required him to understand how systems failed before they failed visibly, which was a kind of knowledge that transferred into everything else he did. He understood machines the way some people understand other people, not through any explicit methodology, but through long attention, through the practice of listening to things that could not speak and learning to hear them anyway. He kept his tools in the coffee cans sorted by size on a shelf in the garage, and he painted the handles of his 9/16" wrenches red because that was the size he reached for most, and the red paint saved him the half-second of searching that accumulated over years into something worth saving. He did not waste time, and he did not waste money, and he did not say things he did not mean. And he serviced the shovel head himself every season in the narrow driveway with a trouble light clamped to the fence rail and a thermos of black coffee on the ground beside his left knee, and the particular focused quiet of a man who is doing something he loves in the time he has set aside for it. He had taught Mara the start routine when she was 9 years old. He had stood behind her with his large hands over her small ones on the grips and talked her through it in the same unhurried order. Every time the order that did not vary because the engine's needs did not vary, and the sequence that worked was the sequence that worked, and there was no reason to change it. Fuel on, choke set, no rushing the throttle. The engine wants to find itself, let it. She had done it wrong the first time, and the second time, and the third time, because she had rushed the throttle, and each time the engine had coughed and died, and each time her father had waited without any visible impatience for the silence to settle before he said again quietly, "No rushing the throttle," and by the fourth time, she had understood that the instruction was not about the motorcycle. The instruction was about her. The instruction was about the discipline of letting something proceed at its own speed when you most wanted it to go faster, which was a discipline that applied to engines and also to everything else, and which she had spent the next 17 years learning in varying degrees of success. Walter Fenn had died 14 months ago of a cardiac event that the doctor described as sudden and the death certificate described as massive, and Mara had not yet found a word for that, was not a reduction of something that did not reduce. He had been 61 years old. He had been the most honest person she had ever watched move through the world, and the honesty had not been a performance or a value system or a thing he talked about. It had been simply the way he was, the way the water treatment facility's pipes were designed to carry water and not anything else because that was what pipes were for. He told the truth because he was built for it, and because he had found over 61 years that it was the only way to live that did not require you to keep track of anything. Mara had brought the shovel head to Colton's 9 days ago because the engine had developed a roughness she did not have the tools or the knowledge to properly diagnose. And because a woman at the laundromat named Bethan had said Dex Colton was the best bike mechanic in the county, which was the kind of recommendation that travels through the kind of people who do not have time to research things before they need them. She had paid $300 cash that first morning, walked out with a receipt and a promise of a full estimate within 48 hours, and spent the drive home telling herself it would be fine, that the roughness was something simple, that she would get a call in 2 days with a number she could manage. The call had come in 40 hours, not 48, and the number was $1,180, and the words at the bottom of the estimate were engine failure beyond economical repair, and below that was a storage warning, and below that was a deadline. She had gone home and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without turning on a light. Then she had called her supervisor at the warehouse and asked about extra shifts. Dex tapped the purchase form again. "The engine is dead," he said. "I understand this is hard, but sentiment does not rebuild compression, and grief does not change the internal condition of a 40-year-old motor. You have 22 minutes before storage fees begin and $600 on the table right now, and next week that $600 becomes $550 because I have carrying costs. You understand carrying costs." She understood carrying costs. She had been carrying costs for 14 months. She kept her hands flat on the plywood and looked past him at the motorcycle in the bay, at the dent in the fuel tank at the shop, rags spread beneath the removed parts with its careful theatrical neatness. The shop rag was red, the same red as her father's wrench handles, which was a coincidence that meant nothing. She knew it meant nothing. She looked away. Then she looked at the 9/16" wrench lying on the counter near the invoice pad, and she looked at it for a long time, and it took her a moment to understand why she was looking at it, and a moment longer to understand what she was seeing. The handle was red. Not the factory red of a tool still in its packaging, still carrying the precise uniform color of something that has not yet been used. This was hand-applied red, slightly uneven, with the faint surface ridging of a second coat applied over a first with a small brush. The kind of paint job done on a Sunday afternoon by a man who was not painting for appearance, but for function, who needed the handle to be a particular color so he could find it in the dark without looking. Her father had two 9/16 wrenches. One was in the coffee can on the garage shelf at home, third from the left, where it had lived for as long as she could remember. The other had been in the canvas tool roll strapped beneath the shovelhead seat when she brought the motorcycle to Colton's 9 days ago. Mara did not move. She did not point. She did not say anything because saying something before she was certain was a way of giving Dex Colton a reason to end the conversation, and she was not ready for the conversation to end. She filed the wrench in the part of her mind that her father would have called the evidence column, which was not a phrase he had used but was a habit she had learned from watching him. The patience of a man who did not speak until what he was going to say had been verified. 21 minutes. The light from the open shop door changed. She felt it before she turned to look the way the quality of the gray October afternoon that came through the doorway shifted slightly, became occupied. She turned. The man who came through the door first was broad across the shoulders, with a beard that had gone gray at the jaw and darker above the coloring of a man in his 50s who had spent those years outdoors. He wore a faded denim cut over a dark flannel shirt, and his steel-toed boots left damp prints on the concrete. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked with engines for 30 years. The knuckles enlarged, the skin along the thumb and forefinger carrying the permanent gray of grease that lives below the surface and does not come out with soap. He did not speak when he entered. 3 men came in behind him, each wearing denim cuts, each moving with the unhurried deliberateness of people who understood that speed was not the same as power. One was shaved to the scalp with an old scar along the left side of his jaw, the kind left by a tool that slipped rather than a fist. One had a silver beard that came to his collarbone and arms, folded inside his, cut in the way of a man who was choosing not to use his size as a declaration, but had not forgotten it was available. The third was quieter than the other two in a way that was not quite stillness, a quality of attention, of concentrated observation, like a man cataloging a room while appearing to simply occupy it. They spread without discussion or instruction. The shaved man near the open front door, keeping his shoulder turned toward the rain and the path behind him clear. The silver-bearded man beside the tire rack along the left wall. The quiet one near the side aisle stacked with belts and filters and cracked plastic bins. They left every exit unobstructed. They made the room smaller without closing anything. Mara's hands came off the counter. She had grown up in a county where men in denim cuts meant specific things, and the things they meant were not always wrong, but were rarely simple. And the arrival of 4 of them in a room where she was already outnumbered by the walls and the clock, and the 21 minutes on the deadline landed in her chest as a new weight on top of the old one. She turned back to the motorcycle and placed her palm flat against the fuel tank against the oval dent, because it was the only thing in the room she knew without question was hers. Dex straightened behind the counter. His shoulders came back and his chin lifted fractionally, the posture of a man reasserting territorial authority. "Customer areas up front," he said loud enough for the room. The broad-shouldered man did not respond to Dex. He walked to a point beside the parts counter and stopped there and looked past Dex at the motorcycle, and he looked at it in a way Mara had only ever seen her father look at a machine, without the calculating assessment of someone estimating value, without the performed interest of someone trying to appear knowledgeable. He looked at it the way you look at something you recognize. Then he looked at Mara. He took off his dark glasses and held them at his side. His eyes in the buzzing strip light were a pale gray-green, the color of old glass, steady and direct without aggression. The directness of a man who had learned that the cost of looking away from things was higher than the cost of looking at them. "That bike's still yours," he said. It was not quite a question. It was something closer to a reckoning. Mara's answer came before she decided to give it. "Yes," she said. Then she said it again because the first time had not been steady enough. "Yes, my name is still on the title." Dex put his hand back on the purchase form. The man in the denim cut looked at the form, then at Dex's hand on it, then back at Mara. He reached into the chest pocket of his cut and brought out a folded cotton shop rag and set it on the counter between them. It was the gray-white of a cloth that had been washed many times and had not lost the history of being used clean enough to use and honest enough to have been used before. He pushed it toward her, not as charity, as something practical exchanged between one working person and another. Mara looked at the rag, then at the man's face at the distance he had kept from her, at the open doorway behind the shaved man, by the entrance at the clear aisle beside the silver-bearded man near the tires. They had not closed anything. She picked up the rag and wiped her fingers, which were not dirty, but the act gave her hands something to do that was not signing a form. "My name is Rook Callahan," the man said. He said it to Mara and not to the room. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said her name. The 3 men at their positions did not introduce themselves. The silver-bearded one near the tire rack had shifted his weight to his back foot, the posture of a man prepared to stand in one place for a long time. The shaved one by the door had his shoulder angled toward the rain outside the path behind him open. The quiet one near the side aisle had his arms loose and his attention moving through the room in the systematic way she had noticed when they first entered. Dex said, "This is a private transaction. Whatever you are here to sell, I am not buying today." Rook did not answer him. He looked at Mara. "May I look at it?" he said. It was a request that understood it might be refused. Mara looked past him at the motorcycle, at the dent, at the red rag with its staged neatness, at the 9/16 wrench with the red handle that was lying on Dex Colton's counter among objects that did not belong to it. She looked at Rook's hands and then at his eyes, and neither of them was asking for what Dex had been asking for. "It is not for sale," she said. Rook nodded once. "I am not here to buy it." The drizzle outside had deepened, and the sound of it on the gravel came through the open door as a low continuous hiss, and with it, the smell of wet earth in the particular cold of October in this part of Oklahoma, which found the gaps in your clothing and filled them. The strip light buzzed. The round wall clock above the parts shelves read 4:37. 23 minutes had become 20 without Mara noticing. She thought about the 3 shifts. She thought about the debit card charge and the $43 and the receipt that had gone soft from handling. She thought about her father in the driveway on a Sunday afternoon, the trouble light clamped to the fence rail, the thermos on the ground beside his knee, the way he would look up when she came outside and move over without being asked to make room for her beside him. Then she looked at the counter again, at the wrench with the red handle, at the place where that wrench was lying among Dex Colton's spark plugs, in his invoice pad, in his cracked jar of $3 valve caps, in the place where you put a tool you had just used or were about to use, in the place where you would put a tool you had taken from a motorcycle, when you removed the side cover and arranged the parts on a red rag with excessive and theatrical neatness. Her father had painted his handles red because that was the size he reached for most. Whoever had removed that side cover had reached for the 9/16 wrench first. Mara took a breath through her nose. The air in the shop tasted of rust and old rubber and wet concrete, and something underneath those things that her father would have called the smell of a room that was keeping a secret. She looked at Rook Callahan and gave him a nod that was small and deliberate. "Look," she said, "but it is not for sale, and I am not leaving without it." Rook picked up the shop rag he had placed on the counter and folded it and tucked it back into his cut. Then he walked toward the bay with the measured pace of a man who understood that how you approached a machine said something about who you were before you touched it. You did not hurry towards something that had been waiting. The waiting deserved acknowledgement. Dex said, "Customer area is up front. I will not say it again." Rook said nothing. He crossed the threshold between the shop front and the repair bay and crouched beside the shovel head. One knee on the concrete, the other foot flat, balanced and patient. In exactly the crouch Mara had seen her father use 1,000 times, taking up no more space than the work required. Dex came around the end of the counter. "You do not have permission to be in my bay." Rook looked up at Mara. "She said I gave permission." She said it clearly, and something shifted in her chest when she said it, the small, surprising weight of a sentence that is both true and necessary, and has been true and necessary for longer than you realized. Dex stopped. Something moved behind his expression that was not the irritation she had been watching all afternoon. Something that occupied the territory between irritation and recalculation. The silver-bearded biker near the tire rack did not move. The shaved biker by the door did not move. The quiet one near the side aisle kept his cataloging attention on the bay. Their stillness was not passive. It was a form of declaration. It said, "We are watching, and we are in no hurry, and we are not leaving until the thing that needs to happen has happened." Rook looked at the red rag beneath the removed parts, at the 2 clean washers sitting separate from the older grime on the concrete, at the side cover leaning against the bay wall at an angle that suggested it had been placed there rather than set down. At the engine itself, the cases and the heads, in the space behind where the side cover had been, the space along the frame rail where most customers would never think to look. He did not touch anything yet. Outside, the rain came down across the salvage yard and turned the gravel dark and the old tires along the fence darker and the flat October sky the color of the iron it had been resembling all day. The round wall clock moved to 4:38, 19 minutes. Mara stood with the shop rag in her hands and watched Rook look at her father's motorcycle and held herself very still inside the way her father had taught her to hold still when you were waiting for something to show itself. You did not rush it. You did not arrive at your conclusion before it arrived at you. You gave the thing the time it was asking for because the thing always knew how much time it needed, even when you did not. Every machine tells the truth if you listen long enough. He had said that to her once in the driveway when she was 11 or 12, crouched beside the shovel head with the trouble light making sharp shadows across the engine cases, and she had nodded as if she understood, and she had kept the sentence in the place where she kept things that mattered before she knew why they mattered, and she had been returning to it for 15 years. She understood it better today than she ever had. She kept her eyes on Rook and on the bay and on the wrench with the red handle on the counter, and she did not sign anything, and she did not move toward the door, and she did not take her name off the title. 19 minutes. The engine sat under the shop light in the silence of a machine that had been told it could not run. The rain came in through the open door and made the concrete smell like something that had been covered over and was showing through. Rook reached into the pocket of his cut and brought out a folded cotton rag darker and more used than the one he had given Mara, the rag of a man who carries one as a matter of habit. He wiped a streak of surface grime from the chrome edge of the removed side cover and held the cover at an angle to the shop light, looking at the screw holes in the gasket face and the way the metal sat. He set it down carefully. Then he spoke to Mara without looking away from the engine. "Your father keep his own tools with the bike," he said. "Yes," Mara said. "Sorted or all together?" "Sorted. Coffee cans by size." He said a man who cannot find his tools in the dark has not learned his tools yet. Rook nodded the small nod of someone confirming something rather than receiving it for the first time. He looked at the 9/16 wrench on the counter without pointing at it. He simply looked at it with the quality of attention her father had called honest looking, which meant looking at a thing for what it was rather than what you needed it to be. Then he looked at Mara, and she understood that he had seen what she had seen, and the two of them held that understanding between them without naming it yet. The way you hold something fragile before you know whether it will bear the weight of being handled. Dex came to the counter and planted both hands on the plywood. "I want you to hear me clearly," he said. His voice had dropped into the register of a man delivering a final position. "That bike came in here with a seized lower end and a fuel system that was half rotted through. I documented it. I have got the inspection sheet, and I have got 15 years of reputation in this county, and I have got a storage clock that starts in 18 minutes. So whatever you think you are doing in my bay, you are going to be doing it without that motorcycle." Mara looked at him. Then she looked at the wrench on the counter. "May I see the inspection sheet?" she said. Dex pulled the invoice pad from under the counter and turned it toward her. The top sheet had his handwriting on it in the same block letters as her original receipt. It listed fuel line deterioration, carburetor contamination, lower end compression loss, and recommended engine replacement over repair. At the bottom, the same phrase from her receipt, beyond economical repair. Beside it, in smaller letters, current market value for core parts, approximately $600. Mara read it twice. She looked at the date at the top of the sheet. Then she looked at the date on her original receipt, which she pulled from her left coat pocket and unfolded on the counter beside the inspection sheet. The dates were the same day, which meant Dex Colton had written his inspection findings on the same day she had brought the motorcycle in, before 48 hours had passed, before any meaningful diagnostic work could have been completed on an engine that complex. She had arrived on a Monday. The inspection sheet was dated Monday. Her receipt was dated Monday. And yet he had told her the estimate would take 48 hours. She did not say this yet. She folded the receipt and put it back against her ribs and looked at the wrench and held the dates in the evidence column, patient and ordered and not yet spoken. Rook had not moved from beside the shovel head. He reached toward the lower engine mount now with Mara's eyes on him and placed 2 fingers against a bolt head partially obscured by the frame rail tucked into the shadow behind the side cover's mounting point, the kind of location a customer would not look, because a customer would not know to look there. He did not touch the bolt. He looked at it. Then he looked at Mara and pointed with 2 fingers, stopping an inch from the bolt without making contact. "That was backed off recently," he said. He said it to Mara quietly, saying it the way you say a thing when you want the person you are speaking to understand it before anyone else has the chance to explain it away. Mara looked at the bolt. Even from where she stood, she could see that the head sat slightly proud of its seated position. The barely visible gap of a fastener that has been turned backward from tight, turned back just enough to introduce a fault without creating an obvious one. The kind of fault that would cause an engine to run rough and eventually to fail to start. And that would then be described by a man with a clipboard and 15 years of reputation in the county as beyond economical repair. Dex said old bolts back themselves off. 50 years of vibration in that frame. Pretending a loose bolt is evidence of something is not going to hold up to anything. Rook said it was not loose when it left whoever serviced it last. How would you know that? Because the thread oxidation is uniform except at the contact face, Rook said. At the contact face, it is clean. The bolt was seated and it was turned back after it was seated, and it was not turned back a long time ago. The room was quiet with this for a moment. The woman in the county maintenance shirt, who had been standing near the bay wall with a box of wiper blades, shifted her weight and looked at the bolt and then at Dex. One of the men in canvas work jackets near the back of the bay leaned around a hanging air hose to see the engine more clearly. Dex spread his hands in the gesture of a man presenting reasonableness to an unreasonable situation. "I understand you are grieving," he said, and he directed it at Mara, turning his back on Rook with a deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. "I understand this bike means something to you that has nothing to do with the bike itself. But what you are looking at is one bolt out of several hundred, and the story you are building from one bolt is the story you want to be true, which is the story where somebody did something wrong. Sometimes machines just die. Sometimes the timing is hard. That is not a crime." Mara looked at him with the attention her father had brought to an engine that was telling him something it did not know it was telling him. Patient. Recording. "You said the inspection would take 48 hours, she said. "I said the estimate would take 48 hours. The inspection sheet is dated the same day I brought the bike in." She said it without raising her voice. She said it the way you say something when it speaks for itself and does not require your voice to carry it. Dex's jaw tightened. "I do a preliminary look same day. Full inspection takes longer. The date on that sheet is the preliminary." "The sheet does not say preliminary," Mara said. "It says inspection." The woman in the county maintenance shirt looked at Dex. The man in the canvas jacket had stepped fully away from the air hose and was standing where he could see both the counter and the engine. Dex pulled the invoice pad back toward himself. "I am not going to stand in my own shop and defend my paperwork to a 26-year-old who came in here with a dead bike and a handful of cash, and has been looking for someone to blame since the moment she walked through the door." Rook stood. He was a large man, and the standing happened in stages, knee first, then hips, then the full broad weight of him, and the shop light threw his shadow long across Dex's invoice pad. He did not step toward Dex. He stepped toward the fuel tank beside Mara, but not between her and anything, the geometry of a man making clear which direction he was facing without turning it into a confrontation. He looked at the 9/16 wrench on the counter. Then he picked it up and held it in his palm with the handle toward the strip light. The red on it was not factory red. It was hand-applied, slightly uneven, with the faint ridging of a second coat, applied over a first with a small brush, the kind of brush you buy at a hardware store, and the kind of paint job you do on a Sunday when you need a thing to be a certain way for reasons that are yours and not anyone else's. He held it toward Mara. "Your father painted his own handles," he said. It was not a question. Mara felt the things she had been holding together since Monday begin to shift, not break, not collapse, but move the way a carried weight moves when the ground changes beneath you and you have to find a new way to carry it. "Yes," she said, "the 9/16 ones." He said that was the size he went to first, and the red saved him the half second of looking. Rook turned the wrench so the handle faced the strip light and held it there. She had not touched it yet. She looked at the red paint and at the thin line along the shaft where her father's brush had turned at the edge and left a stripe of unpainted metal, a line she had seen 100 times in the coffee can on the garage shelf, and she understood what that line meant in this room, in this light lying on Dex Colton's counter, among his spark plugs and his invoice pad. This wrench had been in the tool roll under the shovel head seat 9 days ago. She had checked that tool roll the morning she brought the bike in, the same way she checked it every time she moved the motorcycle anywhere, because that was what her father had taught her. You always know what you are taking and what you are leaving, and she had felt the wrench through the canvas and known it was there. It was here now. Dex said plenty of mechanics paint their handles. Not exactly a fingerprint. Rook set the wrench down on the counter beside Mara's receipt. Not thrown. Set down with deliberateness, the way you place evidence when you want it to speak for itself without your voice attached to it. Then he looked at Dex. "Say it in front of them," Rook said, quietly. "Without heat. You are claiming this engine cannot run because the damage is beyond repair." Dex looked at the two customers, at the woman from the county, at the three Brotherhood men at their positions at Rook at Mara. His face settled into the expression of a man committing to a position because the cost of retreating from it has become higher than the cost of holding it. "That is my professional assessment," he said, "and this conversation is over." He reached under the counter and brought out a second document, this one on yellow paper with the shop's name printed at the top and a column of figures down the right side. He laid it on the counter and turned it toward Mara. "9 days in at $40 a day," he said. "Storage fees of $360 accrued and due. That is separate from the repair estimate. It is in the intake agreement you signed on day one. You want to walk your motorcycle out of here tonight, you pay the storage first, or you sign the purchase agreement, and we call it even. 2 options, not 3. Mara looked at the yellow form. $360. 9 days at $40. The math was correct. The form had today's date at the top and a signature line at the bottom, and a note in small print that fees continued to accrue until the vehicle was released or purchased. She looked at the date the vehicle had been received printed at the top of the yellow storage form. Then she looked at the date on her original receipt, still in her left coat pocket. The receipt she had taken out and put back so many times the paper had gone soft along every crease. The storage form said the motorcycle had arrived on a Wednesday. Her receipt said she had brought it in on a Monday. The same Monday the inspection sheet was dated. She had brought the shovel head to Colton's on a Monday morning. She had a receipt for $300 cash paid that day. She had a debit card charge, time-stamped at 11:47 that Monday morning. She had a text message from the shop's number confirming receipt of the vehicle sent to her phone at 12:15 that Monday afternoon. She had the text still in her phone undeleted because deleting it had felt like letting go of something she was not ready to let go of. The storage form said Wednesday, 2 days at $40 a day. $80 built into the $360 that the math said was $360, but the truth said was $280. Not enough on its own to rebuild the whole case, but enough to show the shape of how the numbers had been constructed, which was not the shape of an honest man's arithmetic. Mara stood with this for a long moment. She did not say it yet. She let it sit in the evidence column alongside the dates on the inspection sheet and the wrench with the red handle and the bolt that had been backed off by a hand and not by time. Rook was watching her. She could feel it without looking at him, the quality of his attention, the same patience he had brought to the engine, the willingness to wait for the thing to arrive at its own moment, rather than pulling it forward before it was ready. She looked at the signature line at the bottom of the yellow storage form and at the signature line on the purchase agreement, and she understood that she was standing between two documents that had been designed to close every direction except one, and the one they left open was the one Dex Colton had chosen for her. And she understood that the design was practiced, had been practiced many times before on people who were tired and alone and running short on the wrong things at the wrong moment. She put her hand into her left coat pocket and held the receipt without taking it out, feeling the soft, worn paper against her fingers, feeling the date on it that was Monday and not Wednesday. That was the first day, the day she had paid $300 and left her father's motorcycle in this shop and driven away trusting a man she did not know. She took the receipt out. She unfolded it on the counter beside the yellow storage form. She set them side by side so both dates were visible to anyone who cared to read them. And she did not point, and she did not explain, and she simply let the counter hold both pieces of paper under the strip light. And she looked at Dex Colton, and she waited. Dex looked at the two documents. He looked at them with the careful assessing attention of a man measuring the size of a problem that has just become larger than he estimated, and something moved behind his eyes in the territory between recognition and something he would not have named as fear, but that occupied adjacent ground. "Administrative error," he said. "I have got 3 people handling intake paperwork, and dates sometimes get logged on the day the file is opened in the system rather than the day the vehicle arrives. Processing thing does not affect the underlying storage obligation. Mara said the intake form is dated Monday. Your storage invoice is dated Wednesday. They are both in your handwriting. She said it the way you say a thing that has already been established and is simply being confirmed for the record. The woman in the county maintenance shirt set her box of wiper blades on the counter and leaned forward and looked at both documents with the focused deliberateness of someone who reads documents professionally and takes her time with them. She straightened and looked at Dex. I work contract compliance for the county, she said, addressing no one in particular and therefore everyone. 11 years. A 2-day discrepancy in a vehicle receipt date on a storage invoice is not an administrative processing error. Processing errors produce random variance. This is a consistent 2-day shift in one direction. Those are different things. Dex turned to her. This is a private matter between me and my customer. The woman looked at him with the expression of someone who has been told this in other rooms and has learned what the phrase private matter usually means when it is said in that tone. She did not move away from the counter. The man in the canvas jacket had moved closer to the counter from his position near the bay wall. Not crowding, simply closer, and the closeness was its own kind of statement. Rook had not moved from his position beside the shovelhead. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and looked at Mara with the steady attention of a man watching someone do something hard and having made the decision not to make it easier than it needs to be, because making it easier would also make it less theirs. Mara said, I would like the storage invoice corrected to reflect the actual date of receipt. Monday, 7 days, $280. Dex said, the invoice reflects our records. Mara said your records are contradicted by your own intake form. The room held this. Havel near the tire rack shifted his weight forward by a fraction. Garrett by the door had both hands visible at his sides. Cobb near the side aisle had moved quietly and without announcement toward the narrow corridor at the back of the shop, moving in the way he had moved all afternoon without calling attention to himself, with the purposefulness of a man who has decided there is something in a particular direction worth examining. Nobody stopped him. Dex did not notice him go. Mara said, I also want the repair invoice corrected. The engine ran. You wrote beyond economical repair, and the engine ran after one bolt was tightened. Both of those things cannot be true at the same time. Dex spread his hands. An engine catching once is not a diagnosis. What you heard was a temporary. Rook said. You said it in front of them. He said it from the bay without moving toward the counter at a volume for the room. Dex turned. Rook said, you said the engine is beyond repair. You said it was your professional assessment. You said it in front of 2 customers and 3 witnesses and the woman who works contract compliance for the county. The engine ran. You need to say what that means. Dex's throat moved. The strip light buzzed. The rain outside continued its work on the gravel. The round wall clock read 4:56. 4 minutes before the deadline, Dex had built and set and circled twice in red ink the deadline that had been designed as a wall and had become in the last half hour a wall with the light showing through every seam. He looked at the purchase form with its blank signature line. He looked at the 2 documents side by side with their contradicting dates. He looked at the red-handled wrench on the counter lying in plain sight among his things, and at the 3 Brotherhood men who had not moved from their positions and were not going to move, and at the woman from the county with her arms folded and her professional attention fixed on the discrepancy she had been looking at for 15 minutes, and at Mara Fenn standing with both hands at her sides and her eyes on his face and not shaking anymore. That was the thing that had changed. She had been shaking when she came in. He had seen it and noted it the way he noted everything that told him how much time he had and how little resistance he would face. He had built the afternoon around it, around the shaking hands and the gray half-moons under the eyes, and the voice that came out thin when she said she was not selling. He had set the conditions and waited for the conditions to do what conditions always did. She was not shaking now. She was looking at him with the patience of someone who has waited for a thing to be true before saying it, and who has waited and who has found it true, and who is now simply giving him the opportunity to confirm it himself before the room does it for him. Mara said, I want the storage invoice corrected, the repair invoice corrected, and my father's tool roll returned. Those are three things. They are all I am asking for. Dex looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the age she was and the shoes she was wearing and the way her coat had been washed too many times and had kept its shape anyway, and something in his face moved through several things and settled into the hard, flat expression of a man whose options have narrowed to one. He pulled the invoice pad toward himself and wrote with short, hard strokes, 30 seconds. He tore the sheet and pushed it across the counter without looking at Mara. Storage invoice corrected, he said. 7 days, $280. He wrote again. Prior repair assessment revised. Engine operational following maintenance correction. Original diagnosis of beyond economical repair withdrawn. He tore that sheet and pushed it across. Then he went to the back of the counter and crouched and came back with a small flat intake tray and set it on the counter. The tray held a rolled canvas tool roll tied with its leather strap, a fuel petcock seal in a small zip bag, a half-inch box wrench with a worn handle, and 2 screwdrivers with handles smooth from use. Mara looked at the tool roll. She had not known until she saw it how much she had needed to see it. She knew it from the shape and the wear on the canvas at the left end, where her father always gripped it to unroll it, and from the slight lean of the strap loop, and from the way it had the particular settled density of something that has been rolled and unrolled in the same hand so many times that it has learned the shape of being opened by those hands. It was ordinary and it was irreplaceable, and it had been sitting behind this counter for 9 days while a man told her the motorcycle it belonged to was beyond saving. She reached across the counter and picked it up with both hands. Dex said, the corrected storage balance is $280. You still owe that. Mara set the tool roll on top of her title folder. She said, you also owe me the $220 for parts you charged and did not install. That is on the original receipt. Parts installed, $220. The parts are on the red rag in the bay. Dex opened his mouth. The woman from the county said, that line item is on the receipt. I have been reading for 15 minutes. Parts installed, $220 dated 6 days ago. If those parts are on a shop rag uninstalled, that is a charge for work not performed. She said it with the flat authority of someone accustomed to finding the place where a contract and the reality it describes have quietly separated. Dex looked at the red rag in the bay with its clean washers and its arranged side cover hardware. He looked at Mara. Then he looked at the invoice pad and wrote a refund line. He tore the sheet and pushed it across. Then he opened the cash drawer. The sound of the cash drawer was different from every other sound the shop had made in the last hour. Smaller and more specific, the sound of something concluding not through any dramatic reversal, but through the slow, patient pressure of things that are true against things that are not, until the things that are not give way. He counted out 20s, then 10s, then a folded 5. He pushed the stack across. $220. Mara counted it. She did not apologize for counting it. Her father had taught her that you counted what you were given, and you did not let the discomfort of a moment talk you out of being careful. The count was right. She put the bills in her right coat pocket with the $43. She said the storage balance is $280. I am paying that now. She took $200 from the bills Dex had returned and counted out $80 from the $43 in her pocket. She was left with $3.40. She put the $280 on the counter. Dex took it without speaking. And then, from the back of the shop, from the storage corridor where Cobb had gone quietly some minutes earlier, there was the sound of a door opening and footsteps on concrete, and Cobb came back into the main shop area and stood in the corridor entrance and looked at Rook. He held up one hand palm out, a gesture asking a room to pause. Then he looked at Mara. There is a parts shelf in the back storage room, he said. Intake shelf. Parts removed during diagnostic work. He paused, and the pause had the quality of a man choosing words that are accurate and therefore sufficient. There are 5 sets of parts on that shelf, 5 different bikes, all tagged with names. None of the names are yours, and none of them are anybody who works here. The room went still. Not the charged stillness of confrontation. The particular stillness of a room in which something that has been suspected has just been confirmed, and the confirmation is both expected and worse than expected, and people are taking a moment to let the full weight of it arrive before anyone decides what to do with it. Dex said nothing. The woman from the county had her phone out. She moved through the room with focused efficiency, photographing the two documents with their contradicting dates still lying side by side on the counter, the corrected invoices, the tool roll, the parts on the red rag in the bay. She was doing this the way she did everything in this shop, without drama and without hurry. She said, without addressing anyone in particular, "I am going to make a call when I get outside." The man in the canvas jacket said, "I brought my truck in here 3 weeks ago. Alternator bracket, you said. $430. He looked toward the corridor. "I want to see that shelf." Dex said, "That shelf is shop inventory, not available for customer inspection." Rook said, "You can let him look, or he can come back with someone who can require it." Not a threat. A description of the two available options and their probable outcomes, stated with the same unhurried evenness he had brought to everything. Dex looked at the corridor. "Fine," he said. Then again quieter. "Fine." Cobb led the man in the canvas jacket to the back. They were gone 4 minutes. When they returned, the man was carrying a small plastic parts tray with a paper tag on it, with his name in block letters and his truck's description beneath it, and a date from 3 weeks ago. He set the tray on the counter. He looked at Dex. Then he picked up his tray and walked to the open door and stopped beside Garrett and turned back. "I will be calling my bank about the charge," he said. He said it without drama, as an announcement of something already decided. He walked out into the rain. Dex stood behind the counter with the cash drawer still open and the invoice pad in front of him, and the corrected documents pushed to one side, and the purchase form lying there still unsigned. Rook walked out of the bay and stood beside Mara at the counter. Not in front of her, beside her. He looked at Dex with the calm, level attention he had brought to every moment of the last hour. "We are going to walk this motorcycle out of your shop now," Rook said. "The title is hers. The balance is paid. The invoices have been corrected in writing. If you have anything else to say it now." Dex said nothing. Rook looked at Mara. She nodded. Havel came away from the tire rack and walked into the bay and crouched beside the shovelhead and checked the front tire pressure with a small gauge from his cut pocket. He looked at the needle and said nothing, which meant it was low but not dangerously, so safe enough to roll to the staging area. He stood and moved the side cover from where it leaned against the wall and placed it in the parts tray with the washers and the hardware. And he carried the tray to Mara and held it out with both hands. She took it. Garrett came away from the door and moved to the bay, and he and Havel moved the things that needed moving: a bent drip pan, a box of brake components, a coil of air hose that had worked off its hook and pooled on the floor, clearing the path between the bay and the front door without discussion and without being asked, because they had all been in enough rooms to know what a path needed to look like before you walk something important through it. Rook positioned himself on the right side of the motorcycle. He looked at Mara. She came to the left side and placed her hands on the grips. The left grip first always, the left first. Her father's instruction, and she felt the familiar weight of the machine lean slightly toward her as she lifted it off the kickstand, 160 pounds of iron and steel, and 4 decades of road in the 28 years of her father's mornings. She walked it forward. The tires crossed the bay floor and the threshold and the main shop floor along the cleared path, and the machine moved with the honest heavy weight of something that had been told it was finished and had been proven otherwise. And Mara walked it forward with both hands on the grips and the tool roll in the tray under her arm and the corrected invoices in her coat pocket against the original receipt that had been folded until the paper went soft. Dex stood behind his counter and watched her walk it out. He did not say anything. There was nothing his voice could do now in this room that would change the shape of what had happened, and he seemed to understand this the way you understand something when all other options have been exhausted. The shovelhead crossed the threshold of the shop door, and the October rain hit the engine cases, and the chrome and the dull black paint, and the dented fuel tank, and the sound of it was small and clean. The sound of weather that does not know what anything means and does not need to. Mara stopped under the awning at the covered edge of the threshold. The rain came down in front of her in a gray curtain across the salvage yard, across the stacked tires and the gutted cars, and the gravel gone dark from hours of drizzle. The Brotherhood stood behind her under the awning, the four of them ranged along the wall in their denim cuts, rain darkening their shoulders. They did not crowd her. They stood far enough back that the space under the awning belonged to her and the shovelhead and no one else. Mara stood with her hands on the grips and looked out at the rain and breathed. She breathed the air coming in off the salvage yard, wet earth and old metal, and the particular sharpness of October rain on dry Oklahoma ground, and she felt the weight of the motorcycle under her hands and the corrected invoices in her pocket and the tool roll under her arm and the $3.40 that were all she had left, and she felt all of it at once. The exhaustion in the 3 shifts and the 9 days and the $43 that had become 3. And underneath all of it, further down than any of that, she felt the thing that had been underneath everything since she walked into the shop and had not been named. She felt it, and she let it be felt without putting language around it, because language would have made it smaller than it was. Behind her, Rook said nothing. He understood that this moment did not need him. After a while, Mara said without turning around, "My father used to say that every machine tells the truth if you listen long enough." She said it to the rain and to the salvage yard and to the dented fuel tank under her right hand, and to the 14 months that had passed since the last morning Walter Fenn backed this motorcycle out of their narrow driveway before a 5:30 shift. She heard Rook shift his weight on the concrete behind her. He said he was right. 2 words. The rain took them. Mara stood under the awning and looked down at the fuel tank at the oval dent on the left side. She put her right palm over it the way she had put her palm over it inside and felt the cold of the metal and the slight roughness of the paint where years of wax had built up at the edges of the dent, and the small exact fact of it, the fact that her father had put his hand here 10,000 times in 28 years of mornings, and that the metal had kept what had happened to it and had not arranged itself into a more comfortable version of events. She thought about everything that had been true in this shop this afternoon and about everything she had done to keep it true. She thought about the moment she had first seen the wrench with the red handle and had chosen not to speak yet because she was not ready, and about the moment Rook had asked to look at the motorcycle and she had said yes, and about the moment she had walked through the bay threshold and said, "I gave permission," and felt the weight of that sentence as something both true and necessary that she had been carrying toward for a long time. She thought about the start routine, about standing beside the shovelhead with the key in her hand and the whole shop leaning toward her, and about the engine catching under her hands, not all at once, but gathering itself, finding itself, the way her father had always said it would if you let it. She thought about the 2 documents with their contradicting dates, and about the patience it had taken to look at them and to not say what she saw until the room was ready to hear it. Her father had tried to teach her all of this. She had learned it imperfectly, the way you learn things from someone you love, through watching rather than through instruction, through proximity to a person who simply was the thing they were trying to teach. She had learned it imperfectly, and she had used it today, and it had been enough. She heard boots on wet concrete behind her and turned, and it was Rook standing at the edge of the awning with the rain just clearing his shoulders, holding out a card. Plain, well-worn, the kind of card that has spent a long time in a vest pocket. She took it. He had written on the back in pencil, an address 40 miles south, and below that, a name, Pruitt. And below that one line, "He knew your father's work." Mara looked at the line. She looked up at Rook. "Walt brought his bikes to Pruitt for the work he could not do himself," Rook said. "Not much, but some. Pruitt will know the engine. He will let you stand there while he works." Mara folded the card and put it in her coat pocket with the corrected invoices and the original receipt. She said, "I cannot ride it tonight." The tire. Rook said, "No. Call for a trailer. Keep it under the awning until it comes." He paused. "Pruitt's shop has a lift. He will do a real inspection. Fuel line breaks the tire. He will tell you what is true and what the number is, and he will not build a deadline around either one." Mara nodded. She looked at the motorcycle in the rain shadow of the awning, at its dull chrome and its flat black paint and its oval dent, at the machine that had been told it was finished and had been shown otherwise. And it did not look triumphant, and it did not look restored, and it did not look like anything other than what it was, which was the only thing it had ever been, and the only thing she had ever needed it to be. The Brotherhood gathered at the edge of the awning, not around her, not crowding the moment. They stood where they had been standing all afternoon, at the edges, leaving the center clear. Havel folded his arms inside his cut and looked out at the rain with the patience of a man for whom rain was simply weather, and weather was simply what the world did. Garrett stood with his shaved head slightly tilted, watching the sky the way men watch weather when they have spent years outdoors and have learned to read it as information rather than inconvenience. Cobb stood with his hands in his pockets and said nothing, which was what he had done for most of the afternoon, and which had been, in its way as much as anything else, that happened exactly what was needed. Rook stood beside Mara for a moment and looked at the shovelhead one last time, with the honest, unhurried attention he had brought to it from the beginning. Then he looked at her. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Your father built something worth holding on to." He paused. "You held on to it." He said it without decoration, the way her father had said things, in the belief that a true sentence did not need anything added to it. Then he turned and walked back toward the bikes parked along the fence, and Havel and Garrett fell into step, and Cobb came last quietly, the way he had done everything. Mara watched them cross the wet gravel to the row of motorcycles along the fence. 4 bikes sitting in the rain, with water running off their chrome in thin streams. She watched the men mount with the unhurried efficiency of people who have been getting on motorcycles in all kinds of weather for a long time and have learned that weather is not a reason to rush. She heard the engines start one after another, the low rhythmic authority of machines that knew exactly what they were built to do. She watched the 4 bikes pull out of the lot and turn south onto the 2-lane road, and she watched the taillights diminish in the October rain until they were gone. She stood alone under the awning with the shovelhead on its kickstand and the rain coming down beyond the concrete edge and the salvage yard going dark around her as the afternoon finished itself and the evening came in off the flat Oklahoma land, the way it always came in out here. Not all at once, but in the slow accumulation of darkness at the edges of things, working inward until the center was dark too. She took out her phone and called for a trailer. While she waited, she stood beside the shovelhead and put her hand on the dent in the fuel tank and held it there and did not try to make the moment into anything other than what it was, which was already more than enough. It was her father's hand leaving its evidence in the metal 20 years ago on a dark morning before a 5:30 shift. It was the metal keeping what had happened to it honest and unchanged exactly where he had left it. It was a machine that did not lie, that had been waiting in the particular silence of something told it cannot run, and that had run anyway when given the chance. It was a 26-year-old woman standing in a parking lot outside Tulsa in October with $3.40 in her pocket and a motorcycle that was hers and an engine that ran and a set of corrected documents in her coat and a card with an address on the back and the knowledge that tomorrow she would make her calls and say what she knew to whoever needed to hear it. It was enough. Not fair. Not the kind of outcome that made 9 days feel reasonable, or 3 extra shifts feel compensated, or cracker dinners feel like anything other than what they were. But the thing that needed to happen had happened. The truth had been readable to anyone in that room who was willing to read it, and several of them had been willing, and the machine had done what her father always said it would do. It had told the truth. The rain came down on the fuel tank, and on the chrome, and on Mara's coat, and on the dent her father had left there on a dark morning when she was 6 years old, and the sound of it was small and clean and patient. The sound of weather that does not know what anything means and does not need to, that simply does what it does because it was built to do it. Mara Fenn stood with her hand on her father's motorcycle in the rain shadow of the awning, and she held what the day had given her, all of it, the cost and the weight and the $3 and the corrected invoices and the tool roll and the engine that had found itself when she let it, and she held it without trying to make it lighter than it was. The rain fell. The engine was quiet. The road beyond the fence carried its ordinary traffic through the last of the October light. Ordinary people going ordinary places in the ordinary closing hour of an ordinary day. In Oklahoma, and Mara watched the headlights move through the rain and felt the cold air come in off the road and touch her face, and she stayed where she was until the trailer came standing beside the machine. Her father had left her hand on the dent he had left in it, waiting with the patience he had taught her. The patience of someone who has learned that the things worth holding on to are worth the time it takes to hold them.